Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight on our webinar about a ReWild adventure at Havens Homestead. Before we go on to the webinar, we would like to introduce a little bit about ReWild Long Island and what we do. So, ReWild Long Island, we are a volunteer-based nonprofit, and we focus on sustainable landscaping to fight the biodiversity crisis. And we promote 5 main practices that is memorable as CROWN, so that's compost, reduce, recycle, organic gardening, water wisely, and native plantings. And you can read many blogs and a lot of information on our website. If you go onto our website at rewildlongisland.org, you can find lots of information there. We are a volunteer-based organization, so we welcome you to get involved with us by donating, volunteering. You can sign up to our newsletter and you would be able to get updates on what's going on locally. We have a online Speakers and Gardeners workshop on Thursday, October 24th at 7 p.m. And this month we are focusing on invasive plants, where it is Halloween after all, and that is that is a horror. So we would love to hear your story. If you can share with us by emailing speakersleads@rewildlongisland.org, your photos, survival tips, blog posts, anything that you have on an invasive that you have battled, whether or not you win, we would love to hear from you. Okay, let's go to tonight's webinar. So I would like to introduce Kathy and Jean. They are the primary gardeners at the Havens Homestead ReWild Garden. Both are graduates of the Suffolk County Cornell Cooperative Extension's Master Gardener Program in the class of 2022. And they are part of a group of a master gardener that has created or maintained the 5 gardens, 2 in Ketcham Inn and Havens Homestead. And they have gardens including vegetables garden, kitchen garden, an all white flower garden box, and obviously the Havens Homestead for ReWild. And they have a flower garden at the on Montauk Highway also. So this presentation covers the steps involved in planning and planting a large pollinator garden, as well as what they have learned about cradle controls, irrigation, and cooperation with many stakeholders involved when gardening at a historic site. And Kathy and Jean, I'm going to stop sharing so you can share yours.
Okay, start sharing. Okay, so we're really happy to be here tonight to share what we've learned about the project, not only about planning and caring for a large garden, but about collaborating with a variety of stakeholders. There are several different groups that have a vested interest in our garden, and they all come with a different perspective. First, a short history. This is the front of the Havens Homestead, where our garden is located. It was constructed in 1740, and there was a major addition in 1898. Benjamin Havens, he was a fisherman and innkeeper down in Center Moriches, and he became the owner of the house shortly after it was built. It was an inn and a tavern, and local troops lodged and received provisions here in 1776. Also, Benjamin Havens had no choice but to host the British forces occupying Long Island and New York during the time. So in 1971, the Havens House was gifted to the Moriches Bay Historic Society by a Havens relative who had inherited it. It was moved across the street to the opposite side of Montauk Highway and was placed on a new foundation. A few doors down is the Ketcham Inn, also on Montauk Highway, which was a former stagecoach stop between Manhattan and Sag Harbor in the 18th and 19th century. It was another tavern site during the Revolutionary War, and today it's a living history museum and cultural center. So both of these buildings are part of the Ketcham Inn Foundation, which is the major stakeholder in our garden. Our garden is between the back of the Havens house, and you can see in the left-hand picture, that's the back of the house with the porch, and the kitchen is right back there. And the other structure is called the Tuttle Barn, which was built in the 1920s. And it's now a museum shop that sells gently used quality merchandise to help support the foundation. The nice part about the placement of our garden is that it's seen up close by everyone who visits the shop. Okay, so tonight, these are the topics we'll be talking about. In terms of the picture, you can see how the garden looks after just 2 growing seasons. It continues to amaze us, as well as everyone else who planted it a year and a half ago. And Kathy's going to tell you something about the application process that we went through.
Hi, I don't have a slide in regards to the application process, but I'm going to talk about what it was like for us. As Dee had mentioned, we were in the first group, and we were fortunate enough to hear from one of our co-gardeners and neighbors that ReWild would be offering a grant. And since we already gardened at the Havens Inn, at the Ketcham Inn, where there are existing 3 gardens, there was none at Havens House except very rudimentary. So that was decided to be the site. But the process was quite lengthy, and thank goodness for my forgetfulness, because it started all in January of 2023 when we found out about it. And in early February, we got the application form. And basically the application is asking why should we be chosen? Why should it have a garden here? And it also reinforced that it was a 2-year commitment, and there had to be 2 or 3 co-leaders to be in charge of that. The application itself was about 11 pages long, and that was it was straightforward, but it did take some time to complete. We are a group of about 10 people who are working on this, between Bert Seides, who's the architectural historian and administrator of the Havens group. Then after we put in our application, then there was a Zoom interview with us, and that was in very early March. We got through that. We were notified of an acceptance, and then we had to fill out another form, which was a commitment form, where we committed to adhering to the guidelines that ReWild had set forth, and they were very straightforward, and they committed to be supportive in very definite aspects. They asked us, what do we need in terms of water? What did we need help with? What did we have experience with? What kind of support we would need? They also needed an authorization letter from Bert Seides, who heads the Ketcham Inn Foundation, that we would be able to use the space, that ReWild would not be held liable for anything, that photos could be used by ReWild of the of the garden. And then we didn't start planning the layout of the garden until we got the spring 2023 ReWild plant offerings. And now we're going to move forward to the different components of that planning considerations.
So we have a native garden in a place of historic significance. So the look we were going for was something that appealed not only to pollinators, but also to the general public. And it had to have a kind of Williamsburg look. Everything neat and accessible to the public. The Ketcham Inn Foundation is in the process of having the house restored, and sometime in the not too far future, the house will be open to the public. So much of the funding to do the restoration that's ongoing is through grants awarded by organizations that expect everything to be historically accurate. So we had to be in keeping with those expectations. And, sometimes people think that native gardens can be unkempt or straggly. So one of our challenges was to have a somewhat neat native garden. And we didn't realize that at first, but the different stakeholders had different ideas. So of course, the fact that we planted flowers native to the area fit in perfectly. And we all went from there, and our stakeholders learned more about native gardens through conversations with us. This slide actually, this is from Google Earth, and we incorporated this picture into our application. The green line is a walking path between the two sides of the garden. And that will soon, it's a strip of sod now, and it'll soon be replaced with a brick path that moss phlox will grow over and around. So we've kind of considered, it's become three separate areas to us. That smallest area closest to the house is in shade for part of the day. And the area farthest from the house is sunny all the time. So it's been fun to see that that section always blooms sooner than the other parts. Okay, and in the left-hand lower corner, you can see the museum shop again. Okay, so one of the first things we did after we got the grant was to take a look at the list from ReWild, what was being offered in the plant sale, and figure out what was the right plant for the right place in our garden. We worked with our committee of master gardeners. There was a lot of discussion
And non-masters too.
and non-master gardeners as well, and came up with a written plan, so we were all on the same page. So Jane Corarino, our lead Ketcham Inn gardener, developed a chart, and the chart has the bloom times, the width and the height of the plant at its full size, and other information about how many plants we would need. And we've referred to this so many times during the process. Then she drew the garden, and we colored it in so we could see what was going to be blooming in what month. So we had a good idea of the colors and what was going to be going on when. We wish we had more blooms on the right-hand side of the garden in April and May. I will say that we have a lot of moss phlox along that path, and that looks lovely during the early months and much of the summer. But we would like to, as time goes on, we will put more plants, early blooming plants on that right-hand side of the garden. Okay, and then we had to get down to business. The sod was removed. We did not have to do that. The Ketcham Inn Foundation found someone to do that for us. And Kathy made we made areas for each plant. And so we divided the parts into sections, and then we added hardware cloth, which you can see lining the garden. It's like a stiff metal screen to keep out the critters. There's a lot of critters out in Center Moriches. This is open land with all woods on the other side of Montauk Highway. Behind the property is a cemetery, so everything is open, and there's lots of animals out there. Okay, so we had about 15 people in our Ketcham Inn group planting, and we had, that red circle is little plant tags, so that we didn't have to micromanage everybody as they were, so graciously helping us. Every plant tag had the name of the plant that should be planted there and how far apart each plant should be spaced. So the critter control. So voles are these little, I'm sure, I know some of you know, but maybe not all of you. Voles are the little mammals that tunnel just below the grass, and they make, you can see the little hills they make. when they burrow just below the grass. And when you step on that hill, you can feel your foot moving down a little bit. To control those, you need 1/4-inch hardware cloth buried 6 inches below the ground and just a little bit above it. But the gophers are a lot bigger and their burrows are deeper underground. I think some of the gophers have been living under the porches and under the house. No, I guess just the porches because there are basements there, for decades, if not centuries. So we use what they need to keep them out. We needed 1/2-inch hardware cloth. But instead of having 2 barriers for two different kinds of mammals, we just stuck with the 1/4-inch, and we buried the hardware cloth 15 inches below the ground, and it stands more than a foot above the ground. The gophers don't like to climb up unstable structures, so that's how the hardware cloth above the ground deters them. And there we were, lying on our stomachs, hacking away at the soil to make those trenches, and it was not easy. For me, it was definitely the hardest part. And it's not attractive. And so now we're collaborating to figure out what to do next. Should we plant something on the outside to hide it? Should we paint it black? Should we cut it back a bit? It's a work in progress, and we've got a lot of different opinions about this, even within the gardeners themselves. So that's a work in progress. Okay, Kathy?
So now I'm going to take over. We're going to go through kind of chronologically from the time of planting to October, in April 2023 to October 2024. So here we are we touched on this. The sod is removed. We have ordered the plants. We know what we want. You can see what it looked like, the size of the garden. I think of the one closest to the viewer as the easternmost garden. That's the one that Jean had mentioned had a lot of shade. And the ones that are farthest from your viewpoint are westernmost in that they're facing west towards the city. They get a lot more sun. You could see another picture of us using pickaxes to dig down deep into the soil to get that hardware cloth in. So that was April. That was a preparation time. May 2023, we knew what plants we would be getting. We had it on paper. That's me walking around, trying to make sure our measurements were agreeable to what was planned. As Jean had mentioned, we used a temporary marker on the ground to mark the sections for each type of plant. And then we later put in those small signs with the plant and the spacing. You could see one of those black thing sticking up towards the front is actually another form of control for critters. It's supposed to be a sonic deterrent, mixed effectiveness. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And again, here we are all just getting ready to start the planting. So that was in May. We did order, we were fortunate, we got wonderful plants from ReWild of all different sizes. Some were plugs and some were very well established plants in quart buckets. But what we did with all of them was we did root washing. So we got them to the side. We filled these buckets up with water. That's Bert Sides on the left, who is the head of the Ketcham Inn Foundation. And you can see a couple of us enjoying ourselves on this warm, sunny day, taking the plants out of the pots they came in, dunking them in the water, teasing out the roots, getting them very well rehydrated. And we think this really helped with settling in of the plants. It removed excess soil, it removed any fertilizers or chemicals to a certain degree. It hydrated them very well. It may have been a deterrent to transferring any insect pests such as jumping worms as well. So I would recommend this if you're going to plant it. We found it very effective. So we started our planting. The plants went in May. You could see we talk about you have to be tolerant of empty spaces. As you know, as a gardener, when you first put your plants in, there seems like there's so much space between the plants. It looks so empty. But we got the plants in. We realized they would get bigger. Now the time for the irrigation. We really had a lot of support from ReWild. Maggie came out. She set it up with us. She taught us a lot about what was going on. I circled some things on here because I just wanted to show you that in June of 2023, what some of the plants look like, so you can see how they progress. So the liatris came in a pot, so it was a pretty good size. But the Joe Pye weed on the right is just very tiny. It was in a plug, and it's just very, very tiny. And you could see in front of the Joe Pye weed, we had gotten some Amsonia, which is already blooming in this very delicate blue color. After we got the irrigation in, we got a local arborist that actually Bert called somebody who he knew who dumped a whole truckload of wood chips that we carted over to put down the mulch. The irrigation, like I said, this was a learning project for us. We needed 4, because of the size of the garden, which is well over 1,000 square feet, we needed 4 zones, 3 of which came from a spigot on the side of the barn and 1 from a spigot on the Havens home itself. It's an older home and water pressure was an issue because of that. Mike Schaefer, who was one of the gardeners in our team, worked closely with Maggie and the other ReWild personnel to learn about the irrigation. The first year, we had chosen things that wouldn't need too much water, that would tolerate fairly dry. But as you know, every new plant, the first year they need to be well settled in with water. So the first year we watered 4 times daily for 20 minutes each time. So that was in the spring and summer of 2023. The second year, this current year, we changed it a little bit. Once every 3 days, 1 hour per zone, because we wanted to get it a little bit deeper. Now you'll see as we go along for the slides how, the drought may have impacted the growth of our plants, but overall did great. This is what the timer looks like next to the barn. And you could see it has the timer. You could set it. It was easily set up. It works very well. We did paint the hosing and the support black to blend in more with the background. In the far upper right-hand corner, you can see something circled in red. It just looks kind of hard to visualize. But this year, we realized that the moss phlox, even though it was supposed to require the same amount of water, really needed less water than some of its neighbors. So Jean figured out an ingenious way. She read about that you take
Actually, Mike told me about it.
Oh, Mike told us about it. You take a pool noodle and you slit it open on one side, and then you just cover up the irrigation hosing to prevent it from watering in that area. So June, you could see now things are really starting to take off. You could see this. So this is year 1, the first year of bloom. The penstemon or foxglove beard tongue was these were just plugs, and you could see how they've started blossoming. They're very tall, but there's not so much leafiness to them. You can see behind them on the left, you can see the yarrow and you can see the liatris. On the other side of one of the western gardens, we planted a row of New England aster and fall sunflower. The New England aster is the tall one. That was in a quart pot. The fall sunflower, the Heliopsis helianthoides, was a plug, and you could see how tiny it was. And this was in June, but it's thriving. Again, you can see the growth spurt they took in June. June 21st, I'm just focusing on the liatris. All you can see is the spikes coming up. That's the one closest to the viewer in the left hand with a tall spike. A week later, you can see the buds becoming apparent, and 10 days later, you'll see the blooms apparent. So really, things just really took off in June. In July 2023, we had a groundbound visitor to our pollinator garden. We did fill in some of the empty spaces with annuals that were donated from some of the other gardeners to make it more colorful and fill in as the garden was just starting off. So we were so thrilled to see this little critter there. A good critter. In August, this is a picture from August 2023. And as you know, a garden is a very dynamic thing. We could see that one of the things we used to fill in one of the empty spots, the plants that we had planned on getting, not all of them were available when we needed them in the spring. So we had some space left. So one of the ReWild and gardener friends, Beth, had winter sown some threadleaf coreopsis, which were tiny little things, and they bloomed beautifully. That's them in the corner. The false sunflower, which is to the left of the coreopsis, a slightly darker daisy-like bloom with a bronze tinged foliage, went from that plug. Remember, I showed you a plug, and now it's back into a 3-foot high blooming wonder. In front, we had the Rudbeckia. This first year, it was more foliage than blooms, but you'll see this current year how it changed. We did start seeing some problems. You could see problems with the liatris. It seems like it disappeared. Where it had been blooming beautifully, it was collapsed. And on investigation, it could have been one of two things. It could have either been vole damage to the roots or overwatering causing rot. When I stuck my finger down into below to see if it was wet, I couldn't feel any roots at all. And close by to some of the fading liatris, we could see vole holes. So we had to readdress that issue with some success. August 2023, here we are at the easternmost garden looking towards the two western gardens. You can see the Joe Pye weed, which, as I showed you before, was just tiny inches high, is now about 3 feet high. And the New England aster, which has a big white arrow pointing to it, is now 5 feet high, and it wasn't even at its full height yet. We did have to support the aster with supports from political signs because they were getting quite leggy and toppling over.
Yeah, so if the political sign is still there 2 weeks after the election, especially if the person lost and the sign is on public property, they really do. You take off the names, and you can use that metal piece for supporting plants. So that worked for us.
So this is August 2023. September 2023, again, we're looking at the aster and the false sunflower. You could see the aster huge, like the one on the right is so tall, the other's wide, that one is leaning, the other one's not so much, who knows. And then the false sunflower are just finishing their bloom, and you could see that they're going to seed heads. Proximal, closer to the viewer, you see this empty space behind the phlox, and you'll see what we did coming up to fill that space. October, as you know, is a time for us all to take, September, October is a time to reassess what looks good, what didn't go so well, what our plans are, what we need to take care of for the winter. ReWild again was going to be providing us with some plants that were then available. So we just walked through, we decided what we could use, what we could divide. So we planted Christmas ferns on the shady edges closest to the porch of the Havens Homestead. We got a butterfly weed, and you could see how tiny they were. Because they're so tiny and slow to emerge, we labeled each of them, and we left those labels in place because we wanted to give them time in the spring to show themselves. We put in some black Aronia melanocarpia, black choke cherry, along the edge to create some terminal end of the garden, because it is a fairly formal garden. We replanted some Zizia, Golden Alexander. We relocated some false indigo to bring some blue color to the westernmost sides of the garden. We divided some blue flag iris and relocated it. And we cut back the iris, the coreopsis, which was, had done beautifully, but was ready to be cut back. So we had a busy October planting. And then came winter. Winter was a time for us to just see what was going on. We didn't cut back anything other than the coreopsis, which we mentioned, because we weren't all familiar with the plants, and we wanted to leave any seed heads up. So for the birds, it allows you to see problems. So we looked at this and thought, we may need more wood chips come spring. What else could we see? You could see some of the Golden Alexander stayed green towards the back corner with and you can see the Christmas ferns still providing some winter greenery. You could also see towards the front of the slide, you could see the phlox also stayed fairly green for a while. What else could we see in the winter? We could see the problems with critters, as we say. So we saw new vole holes, and we tried to put mothballs in there and other things to deter them. We saw the groundhogs. Again, we tried to remedy that. They're a very big problem, because if you can fill in one hole, you could see the stones that were going to be put around there and the caging going to be put around there. They just relocate to another part of the garden. They're very, very crafty. All right, spring is coming. Yay. So this is March 2024. The one on the left is the easternmost garden. That was the one that had the Joe Pye weed, the Baptisia, other things. And you could see barely anything is showing in early March. But if you look, and you can see on the bottom right, you could see this, we still can see the Zizia Golden Alexander greenery, because we had a very mild winter, so it never really died back. But if you look towards the sunnier part, towards the westernmost gardens, by the end of March, there you could see that they had really expanded in width, and they were starting to green up. And then by April, again, beginning of April, moss phlox getting more prominent. And then by the end of April, they were really flowering and spreading so beautifully. And you could see how the ones that got the most sun at the far end were more in bloom than the ones that still were in partial shade during the day. Very exciting. So bright and sunny. In April, things were taking off again. You could see that the asters were getting quite large. On the eastern side of the garden, you can see those small white blossoms are actually, they're light blue Amsonia. You could see some of the coreopsis starting to shoot up, and the Joe Pye starting to come up. And on the right, you could see that the asters were already getting big. So we did what's called a Chelsea chop, and we cut them back to about a third of their size, and we did this for some of the others as well, but we focused on the asters because we had complaints last in the fall that they were too big and too floppy looking. So we cut them back to about the third of their size, and then we realized, unbeknownst to us, some of the other stakeholders were chopping it back as well, but it worked out well. Now, in June, this is the penstemon. I don't know if you recall in June 2023 that we had beautiful spikes, but look how full they are now. The coreopsis is blooming. On the right, you see, yay, our butterfly weed. We've got some flowers. And the rudbeckia, which had just been a rare flower, is in full bloom. So this is this past June. So huge progress in 1 year. Some more pictures of the garden. One in a distance. This on the right-hand side of the screen is the easternmost garden. This is the one that we really didn't have enough that would bloom later in the year, but the phlox is still blooming, the zizia is blooming, the joe pye is starting to sprout. This is July. This is looking from the easternmost garden through to the western gardens. You could see we have the Monarda didymus, the native bee balm, in that very light lilac lavender color, sprouting. And you could see all the yellow on the other side, showing up. We have had problems with powdery mildew on our Monarda, which I think is a pretty common. So we will have to address that come cleanup very soon. This is July 2024. Like I said, the easternmost garden had a lot of spring bloom, and you could see the false indigo is already starting to set seed pods. On the westernmost garden, the coneflower, the rudbeckia, had bloomed gloriously, but then it kind of looked really ratty. We cut it back. You can see also in this picture, the aronia starting to sprout, and either a volunteer swamp milkweed or a anonymous donor planted it without our knowing. Swamp milkweed showing up, and also some lovely crabgrass, of course. July 2024, the joe pye weed you can see is about 5 feet tall, much bigger than last year. More July 2024, just because it was such a pretty month. And we have some of the false sunflower and the rudbeckia in this one shot. August, Jean and I took off. Mother Nature took care of things. This is a picture of the easternmost garden. You can see the zizia seed heads and some of the blue flag iris seed heads. But it had its watering going on and everything looked fine when we came back. In September, we hosted the seed librarian tour. I don't know if I'm sure many of you are aware that in Nassau and Suffolk County, the libraries, many of them offer free seeds to patrons, both ornamentals and vegetable seeds, and they're just starting to become more familiar with natives. So we wanted them to come and see this ReWild garden to see what they look like. And also we advise them of what things they might want to purchase for their patrons that would be very easy to grow from seed. So that is the aster that is was blooming, of course, so lovely in September. And there's still some monarchs feeding on the milkweed. More pictures from September. And as you see, all the seed heads are still left there for the gardeners to see, the librarians to see, and also we're going to leave them for the birds. October, this is the most recent picture. You can see everything is kind of past their bloom. There's a random 1 or 2 flowers from our pollinators, but we put in some non-native pollinators. You can see the zinnias in the front, and they're still blooming well. These are some of our pollinators that came to see us, many, many, many more. And we had some chrysalises, monarch chrysalises on the hardware cloth the first year. Now, we did not see any of them become butterflies because, you know, that it's we were only there intermittently, but they were gone when we came back the next week. And this is a little video. This is, we took one with the seed librarians, just you could see how busy the garden is. All right.
Okay, so now we want to get back to some other factors about the garden, some behind the scenes information. Kathy and I live 45 minutes away from our ReWild garden, and the gardeners, the other gardeners in our group, live all over Suffolk County. So the ReWild irrigation system was very important to us since we get there once a week. And actually, Center Moriches is even drier than the weather at our homes. So we were lucky that Mike Schaefer was able to keep track of this for us, and after Maggie installed it. But when it comes to irrigation in your own gardens, keep these things in mind. The last point can make a difference in your public garden. People want to help and they see that plants are yellowing, so they do some hand watering. But sometimes the yellowing is due to too much water. That's what happened with our phlox. We thought it was getting, someone thought it wasn't getting enough water. So hand watering was done. And then we thought it was getting too much water, and that's why we put the black irrigation, the black noodle, the black pool noodle there. So eventually we talked to each other and figured out what was going on. So that can make a difference. No, talk to all the stakeholders. Okay. So who's in charge of your garden when you have a ReWild garden or any type of public garden? Gardeners love to talk about gardening, and that adds to the fun. Think about whose vision are you following? Come to a consensus early and involve all the stakeholders because it will save you time. And as in our case, sometimes the non-gardeners determine much about your garden, so you need to be willing to share. Okay, and we talked a little about Chelsea chopping before. Does neatness count? In a public garden, it probably does. You are teaching people just by them looking at the garden, you're teaching them about native plants. So you want to make it attractive to the public as well as to the pollinators. Okay, here are some things we considered might have changed. We have a long trek to our garden, you know, an hour and a half travel time. But it's fun, and we get so much work done in the car, the talking, the planning goes on and on. So that's kind of work to our advantage. Think about how much you can keep up with and the size of your garden. How many invested helpers do you have? If we had to do it over, we would have taken photos from the exact same spot so that we could see the progress. If we stood in one place and every month took the photos, would be easier to see the tremendous progress. We are now in the process, you know, we're going to put this stone walkway in. So we need to get these 15 people back over to Havens, and right now they do most of their gardening at the Ketcham Inn. So we need to keep that excitement going. They're proud of what they did in our garden, and we need to keep showing them, look at what's happened since you were last here. Okay. And be ready to, you know, even though you have a plan, you need to revise it. Maybe a better balance of bloom time, colors, and flower shapes. For example, we found that in September, all the blooming plants were daisy shape. And really the shape and the sugar in flowers is chemistry and science, okay? So you can see a YouTube and at the address at the bottom there, and this is a chart from the Ohio State University and talking about Harlan Patch talking about the different sugar types that different pollinators need, the different shapes of flowers that different pollinators prefer. So by having a variety available all through the growing season, you're serving the needs of many pollinators. So we will be constantly working on that. Okay. Things that have worked, researching, problem solving. We use a lot of master gardener sites to get our information. Also, be flexible, listen to what other people's ideas are and come to compromises. Be open to learning and trying new things. Kathy and I have become good friends through this process, and it's so nice to share the excitement. And lastly, document what you've done. What we've done is prepared we have a binder of information with every plant, facts about the plant, specific pollinators that are attracted to it. And we keep this in the museum shop so that anyone who's interested can look at it and see what we've done, see the the scientific names of plants and other information. So a garden in a public space isn't just yours, it's everyone's, and you will receive community input. So we would like to thank ReWild. We have learned so much through this process. And we, at the same time, have taught others many things, people who come to admire the garden while we're there. And we have nice chats with them. So that concludes our presentation.
Wow, that is amazing. I've learned so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a questions. How do you keep volunteers coming and how can they be happy and to keep them happy?
We have a group of about 15 gardeners in that do most of the gardening at the Ketcham Inn a few doors down. We have a very dynamic leader, and I think that's a big part of it, Jane Corarino. She sends out emails often during the growing season when the vegetables need to be tended to. It can be a weekly thing. And what we do is we're never gardening for more than 2 hours because it's too much. But if you get 7 people there on one day, gardening 2 hours, that's 14 hours worth of gardening, and you can really get a lot done. Another thing that Jane does is she doesn't assign tasks to people. She lets people come and see what needs to be done, and then they do what they feel most comfortable with or what they enjoy. And it seems to us that so many of these women, most are master gardeners, and not all are women either. There's men in our group as well. A lot of them have some sort of specialty in something. Maybe there's somebody who has been growing heirloom tomatoes forever. And so we key into what people's expertise is, and we learn so much from each other.
The other thing I think that is important, because it's linked to a building and Bert has a office there. During the winter, we also have guest lecturers come in, and it doesn't happen that often. So that also attracts people, you know, and we've also gone on field trips to other places, so it's a little bit of fun in that way. And we also there's always like food. So there's always cake or little muffins and water to drink. So it's very easy going. You can go when you want and stay as long as you want. But because it's fun, you know, it attracts people. So that's how Jane keeps them.
Oh, there's a question from Paul. Was it all plugs or do you have some seeds, and which seeds did you put down?
Well, the garden started with plugs, grown plants, and then we did not put down any seeds, but we did get seeds that had been started in winter sowing, the coreopsis. So that went in to places, but we ourselves did not use any seed starting. But I think that we wouldn't have, we didn't have that much time to even think about it. So if you want something that gives you more immediate effect so you can see what you're doing, that worked out well for us, and that's what we got from ReWild. You know, things are reseeding themselves. The Zizia, the golden Alexander, reseeds itself like crazy. So it's filling, we're going to have to thin that out.
We did use some annuals to fill in some empty spaces, and those were grown from seeds from some of the gardeners that we work with.
Yeah.
And they just plop them in. And I don't think we're going to have to do that this winter
Yeah.
because the garden has filled out so nicely.
You know, but if you're starting a garden in the fall, we were starting it in the spring, and we certainly could have used some seeds, but if you're starting a garden in the fall, it might be good to consider some of the natives that get cold stratification automatically that you think might do well, you know, to see how that works for you, if you have your site prepared or part of your site prepared.
Thank you for that. Have you gotten any feedback from visitors to Havens Homestead who don't know about native gardens?
We did. We've had when the seed librarians came, I guess that was our biggest group. And since we're only there intermittently, we're not always there to see visitors. But when the seed librarians came, that was, like I said, that was about 28 visitors, and they were, I think, very interested to see the variety, because I think most people know certain natives like Echinacea, Rudbeckia. Those are the more commonly known ones. So they have given feedback. And then also some of the people who are going to the shop have stopped by. And if they stop by, we always chat to them about what it is, what we're working on, you know, what's going on. Oh, look what's on that flower, you know, what's pollinating there. So it's more informal. We did have some members of the Suffolk County, Mid-Suffolk Alliance for Pollinators come just last week. We hiked at a local park and we went there, and you know, we're answering some of their questions about them. So it's very informal.
And we're teaching the staff, the volunteer staff of the museum shop as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
You know, so really anybody we talk to, as you know, gardeners love to talk, and anytime we do talk to people, it's native plants.
Yeah, we keep trying to think of a way. We're located right near a camp called Camp Paquatuck or something, which is serves people with disabilities. It's a summer camp, and they have lots of fundraisers, like they have an Oktoberfest. And we keep thinking we should link on to that event to have visitors come, but everybody just wants to go there and go to their Oktoberfest. Parking is like crazy, but that might be a good opportunity to link on to other events
in the area.
in the area.
Thank you. There is a question from Mary Jo. She wants to know, how do you deal with aggressive plants spreading? And her example was yarrow.
Well, we didn't have our yarrow got some sort of a fungus, and we were able to get some of it back. But that was not a problem. I think the most aggressive was the Golden Alexander. Right now we see it, tiny little plants coming up. But because it's a new garden and we did have some empty spaces, when we see something getting a little bit out of control, we find a place to put it. And soon we'll be at the point where there's a few small gardens in the front of the house at the corners of the property right on Montauk Highway. So we take some and plants and we put them up there. So there's always, well, at the Ketcham Inn and the foundation, there's always another place to put a plant at this point. What we do later, we don't know, but we'll figure that out as we go along.
It hasn't been a major problem yet. I think definitely the Monarda will definitely be one of the things we'll have to address soon, next spring.
Yes, there are a lot of thank yous in the chat. Everybody
you.
loves the presentation. And some suggestion, put up a sign by the parking lot by Kaler's Pond, suggesting people to visit.
That's a good idea.
And plant swap, obviously.
Mhm.
And Jane was saying, you guys have done an excellent job with this garden.
I tell you, this preparation for this presentation was joyful for us because it brought back such good hard work memories, but to see the progression, it was just a pleasure. And thank you so much, ReWild, for the support.